Welcome back. In a moment, we continue our discussion of efforts to tackle sexual violence in conflict. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Investigators are searching for answers after 47 people were killed in Pakistan's deadliest plane crash in 4 years. A plane came down near the town of Hev-Ilian. Among those killed in the incident was the famed musician Junaid Jamshed. Engine trouble is initially believed to have been responsible, although investigations do continue. The search for survivors continues in Indonesia following a deadly earthquake in Aceh. At least 700 have been left injured and more than 100 dead. The magnitude 6.5 earthquake struck in the early hours of Wednesday. Indonesia has asked for urgent assistance. And hackers have targeted the website of Ghana's Electoral Commission as votes are counted after the country's tightly contested election. Fake results have allegedly been circulating on social media, with the Commission taking to Twitter to ask people to ignore any announcements. Well, let's return now to our discussion about efforts to tackle sexual violence in conflict zones. Women are the primary victims, but research shows that it isn't a crime that's restricted by gender. Reports of sexual violence against men and boys have emerged in various conflict zones, including Iraq, Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Central African Republic. Little documentation exists on the incidence of violence, with 62 countries around the world currently providing no legal protection for male rape victims. There's only one country where detailed data exists of sexual violence on male victims in conflict, and that's the Central African Republic. Researchers for the United Nations mission there verified 1,824 cases of sexual abuse on men and boys, involving rape, sexual slavery, and sexual assault. To discuss that further, I'm joined by Charulata Hogg, who's a fellow from the University of California in Los Angeles. She's currently conducting in-depth research on sexual violence on men and boys. It's a difficult subject to explore, I'd imagine, because you must find there's a great reluctance to talk about it.
Absolutely. At the heart of it, at the heart of underreporting, at the heart of the fact that we know so little about it is the extreme stigmatization of this issue. The fact that men and boys just don't come forward. It is very similar to what happened with the women's sexual violence agenda, if you like, about a decade back. Women and girls did not come forward till very concerted efforts were made to get them to talk to programmatic staff, to talk to the UN, to talk to humanitarian agencies, and now we know that the problem exists and we have an idea of the severity and scale of the problem.
And what is that idea? What measure can you apply to this?
Well, I don't think we can collate any figures. I mean, figures are highly misleading in any case, because in any context, with any human rights violation, you never have an idea of the total extent. You have an idea of what's reported. For instance, to say that, you know, Sri Lanka holds the kind of, it is a country where the highest number of enforced disappearances took place. These are the number of enforced disappearances which were reported to the working group on enforced disappearances. We don't know what else happened. Similarly, I think it's very difficult to estimate the number of women who have been sexually abused in conflict situations globally, but we know that the figure is high.
Is there a difference in that, as we discussed in part one of our program today, a certain measure of sexual violence is perpetrated against women in some societies in any case, and that can be exacerbated during conflict? That's not as routine the case for male-on-male sexual violence, is it, in general societies? So why is it so prevalent in wartime? I
think actually what we are seeing in the UK today in terms of the football scandal, in terms of what we've recently read in the media about the amount of sexual abuse that takes place within the police, I think it is a phenomena which exists in non-conflict and domestic scenarios as well. It is just as underreported. Conflict, as you rightly point out, exacerbates situations. The fact is also in conflict, just as women are targeted because of their gender as a means to sort of dominate a community, similarly, men are targeted because of their gender, because once men are raped, they are emasculated, they're feminized. The notion of power within a community is attacked. So I think you have a similar interplay of factors in a conflict.
But there may be places in the world where to rape a woman is regarded by other men as an acceptable way to behave. To rape another man, to rape a young boy, does that have the same acceptability?
Well, in a context like Afghanistan, for instance, where we are beginning to research this issue, you have an all-pervasive problem, a culturally accepted problem of a violation called bachabazi, which is young boys, boys without beards, that's the technical word, are used as sex slaves. Now, the word sex slaves is a Western connotation. The way it is perceived in Afghanistan, it is boy play, but it is sexual abuse of children. Now, we can say this happens in Afghanistan, this also happens in Iran. This is pretty commonplace. However, what happens in conflict is that the number of perpetrators increase. The number of, the way to access these boys gets even more difficult. I like to equate this issue to, say, the problem of widow burning in India. Now, you may say this is very far-fetched, but that was equally barbaric, that, you know, women would be burnt with their husbands after they died, burnt alive. But essentially the British, when they were ruled India, the colonial power, they did ban this practice and they could enforce it. Now, in post-independent India, this issue could be legally and practically addressed because there wasn't a conflict. So,
but how do you go about trying to change behaviours, you say, which are accepted, they're endemic in societies? I mean, is it any of our business to change these behaviours?
Yes, if it is a violation of human rights, it definitely is our business to change them. If a country has signed up to international conventions and protocols, it is the business of the UN to enforce them and ensure that there is accountability for these measures. So yes, it is our business. When the rights of children are violated, it is everybody's business to intervene and make changes. How do you make these changes? I think the first step is to criminalize it, to make sure that it is unlawful in law.
But that has to be criminalized in every country.
Exactly.
Right? In every territory.
Absolutely.
You have to get agreement, and that's a challenge.
That is a huge challenge because criminalization happens when the parliament of a country, assuming it's a democracy, or whatever governance system you have in position, decides indigenously and domestically to institute it in law and policy. Now, it is not an easy ask, but there are also leverages. So in a context like Afghanistan, for instance, the primary abusers that we know of are members of the Afghan local police and Afghan national police. Now, these police forces have been trained and supported by international powers. Certainly, a strong leverage exists to change behavior.
If you were to try and seek a prosecution, though, again, referring back to our conversation about the circumstances appertaining to women who've been attacked, trying to get a witness to stand up in some kind of court of law or some kind of process and say, yes, they did this to me, and I'm prepared to say, you know, that person over there was the person who did it to me. That's going to be well nigh impossible, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, we've had Andy Woodward come forward in the UK context, and I keep drawing back to this context because this is the UK, where we live, is a country with a functioning democracy, with a free media, where still this issue took over a decade for it to come out. So certainly it is difficult. But also, let's not forget that the first time that male rape, or rather sexual mutilation of men as a form of torture, became part of international court proceedings was in the ICTY, when in the Tadic case, this was held. They were perpetrators responsible. So we've had international prosecution on this issue. So I think we need to take some sort of comfort from that, you know, it is possible.
Okay, well, I'm sure you'll come back at the end of your research and tell us more about it. Charulata Hogg, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Now we end with our Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. Freestyling Afghan style. A group of teenagers decked out in makeshift protective gear are part of Afghanistan's first freestyle cycling club. Gathering on the outskirts of the capital, Kabul, they practice a variety of tricks they've learnt online, from videos on YouTube, Facebook and other social media. The club was established 2 months ago to help keep young Afghans away from drugs, petty crime and violence. It's attracting a lot of attention from youngsters keen to pay a monthly subscription of $6. Young women are encouraged to join too. It's hoped the young group will trailblaze a new path for future generations in a country worn down by a long-running conflict. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.